Hi everyone, this is another edition of Identi3, which is a podcast all about Web3 and digital identity. My name is Nick, I'm the CEO of Doc, and it's my pleasure to be joined today by Harrison Tang. Welcome to Identi3, Harrison.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Nick, for having us. Great.
Well, as ever, we would like to have listeners understand a little bit more about your own background. And as we're chatting just before we got rolling here, whenever we've spoken to people previously, and my own background would be the same. They're kind of littered with lots of different jobs that they had, turns in the road, changes in what they do, and but with yours that certainly wasn't the case. And so, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting for a second that you're anything other than extremely busy. It's clear from your background that you volunteer with a number of orgs, including being, I think, the chairman of I hope I pronounced this correctly, the Monty Jade Science and Technology Association.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Great. You're also a board member of Innovate Pasadena, California, where you also live, and then also the co-chair of the W3C Credentials Community Group, which I will come back to fairly soon. And prior to that, you're a graduate of Stanford University. So I congrats on that. Obviously a fantastic university, both an undergraduate in economics and electrical engineering, and then an MSc in electrical engineering. So kind of fairly technical background there. But like I said at the start, you have one job, and you started Spokeo, where you're currently the CEO, president, and co-founder, of course. And you started that in your parents' basement. So that's really interesting, having just left Stanford. And you've been there for just over 17 years, which in itself is an achievement to have a business running that long. So, but again, we'll come back to Spokeo later in the conversation. But as I was saying, it really made collecting your bio together much more simple. But great to have such a bio that really stands out like that as well. But yeah, to focus on some of your earlier stuff before that, you and I first met, Harrison. I became aware of you at least through your work with the W3C Credential Group. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that group does, and maybe what was your motivation to get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, first of all, I want to add I have another job, which is a father of 4 sons. So that's probably the most important, it's quite exhausting. So just wanted to add that. But W3C CCG is a community group under W3C, which stands for World Wide Web Consortium. It is a web standards group founded by some people call it the father of internet, Tim Berners-Lee. So they set web standards. The most famous will be HTML and CSS. And CCG stands for Credentials Community Group. And credentials in the security world is a set of claims about someone made by other people. So essentially, you can think of basically as person records, right? People information. And the Credentials Communities Group incubates open standards around identity or who we are, such as verifiable credentials, decentralized identifiers, and other open standards. So W3C CCG Credentials Communities Group basically incubates open standards around this idea of self-sovereign identity, and then try to push these standards forward.
And why do you think standards are important, Harrison? I mean, the work, and obviously I'm converted about all this stuff as well. But for listeners out there, why do standards even matter? Like, a lot of people might think that they're boring, they take a long time, and they do, but they're really important. And maybe you could explain why they're so important, at least in the context of credentials.
Yeah. So open standards has many different benefits, but personally, I think the most important one is interoperability. It's the idea that you can have multiple companies, multiple people, right, multiple entities working together, and then and their systems actually work and interoperable, because the interfaces and the systems are based on open standards. And the reason why this is important is because you can now then build an ecosystem of companies, right? So instead of having a company own the whole thing, right, and then and everything is centralized, now you can have a decentralized ecosystem, and that furthers self-sovereignty of, in this case, identity, or vice versa, right? Instead of dreaming about one small company take on big tech, right? You can actually have a group of small companies and then working together to take on big tech, which actually increases your chance of success. So I think standards is not just something that sounds great. I think it actually has big business benefits.
Yeah. And I think the other part, I was partly joking about the negative of things taking time, but I think that's also a good thing with standards. Like, companies and tend to want to move very quickly. That whole move fast, break things approach that kind of really came out of Silicon Valley is good to a point, but also, like, why would you not want to benefit from some of the brightest minds in the industry, and also taking your time over something, because it really does make you, or makes the group much more effective at figuring out the edge cases that maybe someone moving very quickly wouldn't necessarily find, and sometimes those edge cases can be pretty harmful. So I think sometimes moving slowly is not, considered cool, or no VC is going to tell you to move more slowly, but it has upsides for it as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think everything is a double-edged sword, right? So when you're trying to bring diverse group of people, companies with diverse backgrounds, agendas, right, and perspectives together, I mean, there's a lot of pros, but there's also cons. And one con to that is it takes time to bring such diverse perspectives together. But once you make it work, that diverse perspective help build a more robust system. And again, the key thing about what standards do is you can think of it as a gel that brings and builds a whole ecosystem. And once you have that ecosystem, it's very, 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 very hard to beat.
Yeah. And what was your motivation for getting, like you say, Harrison, you've got 4 boys, which I can't even imagine. I have 2 kids, and that was enough. I can't imagine double that level of work and stress. Obviously busy with Spokeo and all the other advisory stuff that you do. How do you find the time? And then also, what was your motivation behind wanting to get involved with that community group? Yeah,
so I have always been very, very interested in the problem of identity, or the question of who we are. And Spokeo is a leading data aggregator and the identity platform in the United States. So we aggregate about 16 billion records and resolve it into 600 million entities to help about 15 million users a month to search and connect with others. So my background actually lies from the perspective of data aggregation. But one key dimension of identity, and there are three dimensions to identity. There's the entity, data, and then access control. So I have always been interested in solving all 3 problems. And so when I came across the Verifiable Credentials data model paper, and I read it, and I was very, very impressed. And that's actually what prompted me to figure out, hey, how can I actually understand the people and the thought process behind writing this paper. It's actually probably the best paper I've read in regards to identity, to be very, very frank. And that's basically the impetus, and one thing lead to the other, and now I'm the co-chair of W3C CCG that kind of leads these self-sovereign identity open standards.
Oh, very good. So winding back a little bit, Harrison, why do you think we need verifiable credentials? Like, what problem are they solving for us?
So before we answer that question, let's define what verifiable credential is, right? So verifiable credential is basically a digital credential based on open standards. And credentials, as I mentioned, is basically it's a kind of a security discipline terminology. It's a set of claims about someone. So you can think of it as a person record, right? And the verifiable part comes from this idea of a digital signature. So it's actually the claims are signed by issuers and presenters, and so it's tamper-proof. So if someone tries to change the information or they try to attack, right, then trying to doctor the information, then you can quickly verify and see, hey, no, this is not real. This actually has been tampered with. So the digital signature part using cryptography makes it tamper-proof, and that's why it's verifiable, right? So that's what verifiable credential means, and it's a digital credential, right? So it solves many different problems, and ultimately it solves the question of identity and who we are. So the problem of who we are actually has many different use cases. Okay, and at Spokeo we actually cluster it into 4 groups, a 2x2 matrix. So the first one is consumer connectors, basically finding contact information to reconnect with long lost families and friends, and so on and so on. And then there's consumer protectors and verifiers, right? So you already know the person, but you want to make sure that they are who they say are. They say they are, right? So finding referential information to double check, quoting Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. So that's the consumer verifiers, and there's the business connectors, and then the business verifiers, and in the business verification use cases, identity verification use cases includes things like KYC, know your customer, and the financial crime compliance. So many different use cases, and verifiable credential as an open standard can potentially disrupt. And actually, I wouldn't use the word potentially. I believe that it will disrupt all these use cases.
Yeah, and as you say, the use cases are almost limitless to the point where, sometimes from Doc's perspective as a vendor and a technology provider in the space, it's sometimes challenging to know where to offer your product because there are simply so many ways to use this that it's, from our perspective, it's most certainly a blessing, but a little bit of a curse sometimes as well. Harrison, of all the different use cases that you mentioned a couple there, is there one in particular that you really grabbed your attention?
Yeah, definitely. So let me be a little bit more specific about certain use cases that the W3CCG has been focused on. So one of the such use cases will be there's a task group around education, right? Credentials. So academia and educational institutions issuing verifiable credentials, right? And that can easily lead to employment credentials, right? Employment screening, FCRE regulated employment screening, and those kind of background screening use cases, right? HR and so on and so on. Personally, I'm very interested in identity verification use cases like know your customer, financial crime compliance. I think there is a lot of need there, and then needless to say, there's also a lot of money there. A lot of business opportunities, right?
Some legal stuff as well.
Yes, exactly. But ultimately, I think the most interesting part about verifiable credentials is how it can enable self-sovereign identity, right? So what does that mean? So today in most identity verification use cases, the verifiers, the searchers, right? People trying to search for information or verify information will go directly to the data sources or the issuers. Okay, so today that's how Spokeo works today. It connects verifiers to issuers, and the data subject is actually not in the equation. They don't even know that this exists, right? So by actually enabling data subjects or holders to be exact, and by the way, holders doesn't need to be data subjects, but by enabling the holders, right, to actually intermediate identity-related transactions, they will gain self-sovereignty and control over such identity-related transactions. So this is the core idea of self-sovereign identity, and I actually believe that this mechanism is the mean to the end of disrupting all these use cases that we just talked about. Yeah.
And I think where we're at now with the industry, I think it's something, I mean, really a lot of the papers and early companies like Sovereign Foundation, Everin, and people like that really have been kind of around 6-7 years. And I think from some people's perspective that they had maybe expected a wider adoption of the technology. We're seeing it in cryptocurrencies and things like that. But I think that generally people had maybe, I don't know if you share this view, but maybe had thought that this would be in more people's like digital wallets, for example. Do you agree with that? And then also, what challenges are you seeing for adoption of this technology moving forward?
I think the biggest challenge in regards to self-sovereign identity, verifiable credentials, decentralized identity is really business problems, or should I say product market fit, right? So the technology is there. It is very interesting. But at the end of the day, for this technology or these technologies to work, you need to have an ecosystem, right? If you only have the verifiers and you don't have the issuers, you don't have data sources, then guess what? It's useless. And then same thing, right? If you only have verifiers and issuers, you don't have a lot of users, right, giving consent, right? The data subjects or the holders giving consent to the information sharing, then it doesn't work too. So it's a classical multi-sided marketplace problem, okay? And the classical multi-sided marketplace problem always has what's called a cold start problem, meaning that if you have supply but you don't have demand, well, guess what? No one's using it, and vice versa. So you need to get both the supply and demand in this case, because the trust triangle, that's technically what's called, the trust triangle has three roles. It has the issuer, verifiers, and holders. So it's actually not a two-sided marketplace. It's actually a three-sided marketplace. So how do you actually bring all these players on board to build an ecosystem? You know, that's the toughest thing. And as far as I know, I haven't seen someone who had cracked the nut yet. Mm-hmm.
Yes, those network effects almost, isn't it? The catch-22s that exist around platforms, like you said. I suppose as well, there's some things happening in the marketplace that maybe can make us optimistic that things are going to improve. What I'm thinking about when I say that, Harrison, is things like some of the things that are happening in Europe. The European Commission tends to be quite forward thinking about technology and kind of leading the way in with regards to privacy, which of course decentralized or self-sovereign identity can help promote, and actually regulating nation states within the EU to actually give their citizens access to these types of wallets is certainly going to be a big boost. There are a few other things happening as well. What are the advancements that maybe you're seeing in the space that you think that are going to really drive growth of this technology amongst maybe companies as well as individuals using it?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple advancements. I'll just name a few. I think there are work around more enhanced privacy, like selected disclosure functionalities, right? So most recently at W3C we have someone actually presenting on the BBS Plus cryptography, right? And then also the Gordian envelopes. And so it basically supports these features where it's called selected disclosure. So you can just, instead of disclosing the entire verifiable credential, you can selectively disclose what you want to disclose. And then there's also technologies such as zero knowledge proof. So there's no correlation between what you disclose and then the underlying data. So these are the enhanced privacy technologies. There are works around improving interoperability, like, for example, the DID test suites. So test suites are quite important in actually enhancing interoperability so that people can say, hey, whether their work actually conforms to the standard, right? So, and then you talk about the wallets. But what makes me most excited about is actually the trust frameworks. Okay, so trust frameworks is actually more than just a technology. It's about different governance structures, right? To actually know who you should be trusting, right? Because at the end of the day, any entity can create a decentralized identifier, right? right? So how do you know that decentralized identifiers actually is created by a legit person or a fraudster? Well, you need a trust framework for that. So there's actually a lot of work around that. There's actually a work item in the W3C CCG that's talking about enabling different verifiers to build a list of trust verifiers and issuers, right? So I think those kind of works around trust frameworks is actually what excites me the most.
Yeah, and it's probably like, I mean, a lot of the people, like when you know this industry well, the technology, they're absolutely immersed in it. Like they're so excited by it, and you could tell, and they should be, because it's really, really interesting stuff. But a lot of the time, I'm not going to say it's the boring work, but it's also putting in place these business processes where, as you say, like anyone can go onto a public identity network and create an identity and start issuing quite happily away. And it's like, how do you trust that entity to, do they even exist? Are they real? And so having these business processes in place of having trusted issuers is, as you say, a key part of it all. So it's maybe not getting the people that enjoy software development necessarily overly excited, but it's an absolutely essential part of the whole ecosystem. I think it's something that I see, like again in Europe, EBSI, the kind of European Blockchain Services Infrastructure Group, they're kind of running through multiple pilots right now. I think they're in phase 3, and that's a kind of key part of their ecosystem, is having these trusted issuers set up and assigned by the governments that reside in that country. So it sounds like you guys are on a relatively similar path there.
Yeah, definitely. I think just like you said, a lot of times the tech folks, right, forgot the importance of the business things. The innovations around Bitcoin, for example, in my opinion, it's not how crazy blockchain data structure is or distributed ledgers. I mean, that's kind of cool. The consensus mechanism is actually quite a cool innovation, but I think the biggest innovation is how it couples with economic incentives, right? That ties how these economic incentives helps securitize the distributed ledger. That's what actually makes it so successful, right? In my opinion, in my humble opinion. So I think it's not just the technology; it's actually a combination of technology and business solutions that make Bitcoin, or in this case, self-sovereign identity, to be successful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, definitely. I also wonder if part of the slowness of adoption is sometimes around people getting comfortable with using things like wallets, where if you've been involved in the cryptocurrency industry for a while, you become quite comfortable. At first, the notion of managing your own bank is a frightening process. You send it off to your crypto off to the wrong place, it is gone. There's no helpline. You're done. And I think once you get over that blip, and of course there are things that you can do to make that a little bit more palatable, but ultimately it's a kind of a very different way of thinking about things. I also wonder if that's also what holds it back. Like the Web 2 that people are used to using has had many, many years and billions of dollars of UX testing has gone into it. And then kind of, I'll call them Web3 companies, but companies enabling individuals to control their own data, they have had sufficiently less time, less budget to work on these problems. And do you think it also, like, part of getting people to adopt it is still a bit difficult to use, and it's still, the industry maybe leads a little bit too much with the technology side and maybe not enough about the benefits, or do you see that differently?
Yeah, definitely. I think the user friction is definitely an issue. But in my humble opinion, I think the most important problem that Web3 space needs to solve is to acknowledge that Web3 by itself is not a value proposition, right? Like in my definition, product is defined as solutions to customers' problems. And customers' problems in identity usually are, hey, I want to make sure that this person is who they say they are, so that I can conduct an authentic, trusted transaction. Okay, so ultimately, it comes down to money, right? Like risk control in this case, right? Like I don't want to lose money to some fraudsters, right? In the identity verification, financial crime compliance use cases. The value prop is not decentralization. I think decentralization is a great differentiator. It's a great secondary value prop that rallies peoples around these principal values and ideas that I believe in. But that said, that shouldn't be a leading value propositions, because at the end of the day, people are buying a solution or buying and getting a job, right? People have jobs to be done, and they are hiring a product to solve that jobs to be done. And usually that jobs to be done is not about, I want to decentralize XYZ. So decentralization and these technologies really the mean to the end, and we need to keep the customer problems in mind, like what jobs the customers are hiring us to do.
No, very well said. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So getting back to Spokeo then, and so you talked a little bit, I don't know if you want to expand on that, Harrison, you're quite kind of satisfied with what you've said so far, but really we've talked about kind of Spokeo as a kind of data aggregator, almost like I kind of thought about it as almost like a search engine for individuals. And I know that there's maybe a couple of products sitting within that maybe focus on different areas, but do you want to expand on that? I don't know if I really did you justice with that explanation.
Yeah, definitely. So Spokeo today is basically a people search engine. The underlying technology is a data aggregation technology that aggregates about 16 billion records, and we actually link all these records. The problem is called entity resolution. It's about actually constructing digital entities on top of records, right? So it's a classical graph problem. And so we resolve them into 600 million person entities. And we have about 15 million users to search, connect, and know who they're dealing with. So earlier I've talked about how we think of our different markets. Our market is quite unique. It's not a classical marketing problem where you segment a big market into smaller chunks, right? We have thousands of use cases, and how do we actually clustering upwards? And we cluster it into this 2x2 matrix of consumer connectors, consumer protectors or verifiers, and then the business connectors and business protectors. So those are the different use cases that we have. And we have been quite interested in the problem of identity for a long, long time. And if you look at how the identity is defined, it's basically distinct. It's actually about data attributes and characteristic about distinct entity, right? So there's two. That English definition already have two dimensions. One is the idea of entity and existence. The other one is the idea of data attribution, right? And then we want to add a third one, which is access control, because at the end of the day, data that no one can access are just zeros and ones on some databases that no one cares about. So we kind of divide the problem into these three chunks, and we have been kind of investing in these three areas and trying to solve the question of who we are.
Yeah, like I say, it's fascinating for someone to leave, straight out of university or college, and then straight into working on that problem. And is it, like I saw in your bio, it sounded like, I think you made the comment that Spokeo had failed several times. Is its current iteration or kind of incarnation quite far removed from what you originally set out to do, or is it just it's largely what you'd hoped to achieve? You just had to take a bit of a winding road to get there.
Yeah, so I definitely didn't think about solving the problem of identity when I got out of college. I didn't even know what that means. I wasn't that philosophical when I was in college, that's for sure. So we started in 2006. So at that time, it seems like every other month, a new social network came out, and actually, Facebook wasn't even the biggest one. It was MySpace, and Friendster is still around.
The worst thing, Harrison, is I'm old enough to remember that. So,
likewise, I usually don't like to tell this story because it kind of reveals my age. But
yes.
but anyway, so yeah, that's how we started. We thought there's an opportunity to build a meta aggregator on top of all these social networks. So we actually pioneered the concept of social network aggregation. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, social network aggregation couldn't work because Facebook actually dominate the space until recently. So that we have to basically change, right, and evolve, and because otherwise we couldn't keep the lights on. So around 2008, we evolved the same exact technology to a social search engine. So instead of aggregating people's, helping people streamline their digital lifestyle via aggregating their different social feeds, we help using the same technology help you find other people's social data. So that's kind of how we got started.
And then how do you tying this back again to the kind of some of the key topics that we've gone through during our discussion today, the kind of issues around privacy and it being important, like who owns their, making sure, I guess, that individuals own their own data being a kind of primary driving force for many of us in the industry. What is Spokeo's approach to privacy and data ownership?
Yeah, so we definitely believe in the dream of self-sovereign identity. That's why I kind of took on this role at the W3C CCG. Privacy is defined as a level of data access to one's self or one's group. Okay, so that's Professor Irwin's definition. So it's about level of access, right? If you look at different laws, at least in the United States, whether it's FCRA, GLBA, or the health one, HIPAA, Children's Data Privacy, CAPA, and this DPPA, Driver License Privacy Act. These are all about privacy, data privacy laws, right? That governs a certain type of data to be used for certain use cases. Okay, so that's a common theme among all these laws. So you can think of privacy not as a challenge, okay, but rather an opportunity to grow. Because if you can tackle these privacy challenges and problems, then you can actually get into these regulated markets and use cases, right, to serve these needs. So in my opinion, for us, I told people, privacy is something that not just that I believe in, right? And by the way, privacy is not about elimination of data. Okay, the data revolution has already happened, right? There's going to be more data, not less. Privacy is about control over data sharing and data access. And so with that in mind, I told the team, hey, let's really invest in it, because I see privacy as an opportunity to grow into different markets that previously that we couldn't get into.
And so continuing on that thread, Harrison, how do you see the emergence of identity technology, particularly decentralized identity technology, impacting what you guys have at Spokeo have been doing in terms of how has it impacted your roadmap? Has it altered it significantly? And what about your business model? Are you seeing different ways to make money, or are you kind of continuing on the same strand of that you have been?
Yeah, it really hasn't changed our roadmap at all, because we actually believe in self-sovereign decentralized identity for a long time, actually, since 2010, 2011, actually. And so we have always kind of built our technology with that in mind. And so I think for us, we think of Spokeo as a platform of connectors, right, between different roles in the trust triangle. Currently, we connect verifiers to the issuers, right? And then our goal, and we have been kind of working on this, even though we haven't found the product market fit yet, but we have been working on actually getting data subjects or holders, right, involved in this equation and completing that triangle. So I think for us, we actually think and welcome the emergence of the decentralized identity ecosystem, because I always told the team, I want a small piece of a huge pie, not a big piece of a very small pie. Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so great. When if we kind of zoom back out to credentials and decentralized identity, why I think some people in the industry get nervous that some of the big players come in because they obviously have the clout to heavily sway and influence markets, but the very fact that they're there means it's going to be a much bigger pie. So yeah, it's a good point that you make. And just so I understand as well, kind of going back to Spokeo, so if there's a holder's data or a data subject, I think you mentioned that, who's putting that data onto your platform, and then are the subjects or the holders, how are they controlling that information on the platform?
Yes, so currently we only aggregate publicly available information, and we actually offer an easy 1 or 2 step opt out. Actually, we have that since 2010. So, like 8 or 9 years before the CCPA, the California Privacy Act, came about. Actually, so we have all these different privacy controls, and we have been working and testing an identity protection product, right? That actually allows users to basically do holder bindings, right? And then have more privacy controls, not just on Spokeo, but across the entire web, actually, including their credit reports and so on and so on. So we have been actually working on and testing that. As I shared before, it's still a work in progress. The product works, but the product market fit is not there. To be exact, right? The cost per acquisition is actually higher than the lifetime value. In other words, your cost is actually higher than the revenue you're generating.
You're buying customers. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not VC funded. So VCs oftentimes they will just throw money at a problem and then hoping that they can reach a scale where the lifetime value actually becomes higher than the CPA. We're not that. So we actually have to find a true product market fit and scale from there. So that's kind of what we've been working on.
It's a refreshing way to do it as well, with so many venture-backed companies these days as well. It's nice to hear of someone that's bootstrapped it, amongst themselves, and then really trying to make a sustainable business without. I know that VC funding is a bad thing; it suits certain amounts of businesses very, very well. But sometimes, as a founder, I guess it would be nice to have that kind of control and able to really take the company and make sure it follows the vision that you had. Because, of course, when you bring new stakeholders in, of course, everyone's got their own vision of how things should be. So I guess that's a positive aspect, that maybe you can't grow quite as quickly, but you're following your own dreams, which is important as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think if we're VC funded, we're definitely not going to be able to work on self-sovereign identity problems, because once you're set as kind of the people search, people intelligence service, like VCs just want you to scale that product market fit, right? Which we already found in that market. So it's kind of hard to actually convince them to work on these technically cool initiatives that doesn't have proven product market fit. So we're actually very, very glad that we have the opportunity to dip into these problems and continue to try to see if we can solve them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got one final question. How can interested individuals, so kind of zooming back over to people maybe working in the SSI space or the identity space, they have heard about the W3C Credentials Group, either through this podcast or some other means. How do they get involved?
Yeah, definitely. So they can just go Google W3C CCG or W3C Credentials Community Group. I think the link is like w3.org/community/credentials. And you can just go check out there. And you have troubles signing up to the mailing list, feel free to reach out to me or any of the co-chairs. I can be reaching any of the social media platforms with the handle Tang Talks, TANG TALKS. We actually have a cool lineup of speakers. We meet every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. noon Eastern time. And we invite different speakers from different disciplines every Tuesday. So feel free to hop in. Mm-hmm.
Harrison, is there anything else that you wanted to mention or talk about before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered most of it. I would just say that if the listener are interested in these topics, please do go to that Verifiable Credentials paper. It's literally the best paper I've read in the past over a decade. The key idea of trust triangle, the decoupling between the issuers and holders, because most of the time people think that their identities is actually created by them. That's actually false. Okay, most of your identity data is actually not created by you. It's created by some other folks. Like, for example, your Facebook account is created by Facebook, right? Your driver license is actually issued by the DMV. So this idea of trust triangle and modeling these interactions, having this understanding that identity is not just about yourself, your entity, but how you actually interact with other entities within your environment. Essentially, it's about relationships. I think these ideas are all actually pointed out in the paper, and it can help people gain a much deeper understanding of this problem of identity, which actually has been existed for thousands of years. In the Greek times, people are wondering about this problem of what's called ship of Theseus. So it's the idea that, hey, a ship, if all its parts are being replaced, after all its parts are being replaced, is this still the same ship, right? It's that this idea of what is an entity, and I think people have been wondering about the problem of who we are, the problem of an entity for a long time. And if you have the chance to actually read that Verifiable Credentials paper, I think you'll gain quite a bit of insights and inspirations from that paper, just as I have a few years back.
That's fantastic. Harrison, thank you very much for coming on to Identi3. You've been a great guest, and I really appreciate you spending the time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.